A chilling murder outside a New York hotel. A ghost gun, a manifesto, and a fight for life. Is Luigi Mangione a cold-blooded killer or a hero for the people? The feds want the death penalty, but his supporters say he's a martyr. The stakes are high, and the truth is even darker. Stay tuned to find out if Mangione will live or die. This story will blow your mind. Watch till the end. Chapter 1. The day the streets of Manhattan turned red. It was the kind of morning you couldn't predict. Brian Thompson, a 50-year-old CEO, stepped out of the New York Hilton Midtown with his head full of meetings, his life in motion. Little did he know it would be the last day he ever stepped out the door alive. He was just another businessman hustling through his day when out of nowhere, his world exploded in a storm of gunfire. Thompson barely had a chance to process what was happening. 4 shots. Rapid. Precise. He dropped like a rag doll, blood pooling on the sidewalk in front of stunned onlookers. People scattered. Some screamed, but the gunman didn't care. He didn't even break a sweat. He fired the shots and within seconds he was gone. The scene was chaotic like something out of a nightmare. Cops flooded the streets collecting evidence, but there was something strange about the shell casings they found. They were marked with eerie words: deny, defend, depose. What did it mean? Was this just a random killing? Or was something deeper at play? As detectives scrambled to make sense of it, one thing was clear. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was calculated. This was personal. 5 days later, they found their suspect in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old nobody with no criminal history, was sitting in a McDonald's parking lot like it was any other day. He didn't know his life was about to spiral into chaos. They arrested him, and that's when things took an even darker turn. In his car, a ghost gun, untraceable, homemade. Right next to it, a manifesto. In it, Mangione raged against the parasites of the healthcare industry. The words were violent, vengeful, and his motive? Clear as day. He wasn't just angry, he was on a mission. But here's the kicker. Mangione's supporters started pouring in. Donations to his legal fund hit $780,000 within days. His message resonated with people who were fed up with the system. A killer turned martyr. What was going on? How did this twisted tale of revenge morph into a fight for justice? The city was buzzing with tension. And this was just the beginning. Buckle up. It's about to get ugly. Chapter 2. The death penalty decision that shook America. Just a few days after Luigi Mangione's arrest, the nation was hit with a bombshell. On April 1, 2025, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi made a shocking announcement that would change the course of the case forever. The feds weren't just going after Mangione for murder, they were going for the death penalty. Bondi's statement was blunt. Luigi Mangione's murder of Brian Thompson was premeditated, cold-blooded, and an attack on an innocent man. We will not allow this kind of violence to stand. Her words echoed across the country like a war cry, drawing a line in the sand. The message was clear. They were going all in. People's reactions were swift, and the country was divided. Supporters of Mangione immediately began raising hell. This is political. They're just trying to make an example out of him, shouted Karen Friedman Agnifilo, Mangione's fiery lawyer. She was ready for a fight, and she wasn't backing down. She called the federal decision barbaric and accused the government of using Mangione as a pawn in a political game. But Bondi wasn't backing off either. We are carrying out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again, she said, her words hanging in the air like a dare. To her, this wasn't just about one man's crime. It was a message. The justice system, at least as she saw it, had to show its teeth. Meanwhile, the media storm kept growing. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, desperate to get the first scoop. The case was bigger than just the murder of an innocent man. It was quickly becoming a political battleground. The death penalty was controversial, sure, but for Bondi it was the only option. For Mangione's defenders, it was proof that the system was broken. At the heart of the debate was the question that no one could seem to answer. Was Mangione a cold-blooded killer, or a man who had been pushed to the brink by a corrupt system? His manifesto spoke volumes. Was this just a lone wolf striking out against an unjust world? Or was he the face of a growing movement against the power of the healthcare industry? As the news of the death penalty decision spread, the courtroom tension went through the roof. The clock was ticking toward the next trial date, and everyone knew that the world would be watching. Bondi had thrown the first punch, and now it was time for the defense to come out swinging. But in the back of everyone's mind there was that one lingering question. What if Mangione wasn't just another guy losing his mind? What if he was trying to tell us something much bigger? The case had only just begun, and already, the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. And with each new twist, the story of Brian Thompson's murder seemed to slip further and further from the truth, sucked into a vortex of politics, power, and revenge. Chapter 3. The Manifesto. Was this a murder or a message? When Luigi Mangione's arrest went public, the world was shocked, but nothing could prepare them for the Manifesto. Found hidden in his car during the arrest, it wasn't just some rambling note, it was a declaration. A full-on written-out battle cry against the very system Mangione had just killed for. The pages were filled with dark, venomous words, pointing directly at the healthcare industry, the parasites who had, in his mind, ruined countless lives. And Brian Thompson? He was just another pawn in a game far bigger than any of them could have imagined. The Manifesto, as authorities began to piece it together, laid out a chilling reason for Thompson's murder. Mangione had a vendetta. He didn't just target a man. He attacked the system, the billion-dollar healthcare giants that he believed had destroyed families, sucked people dry, and left them to suffer. He saw Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, as the face of everything wrong with the system. For him, Thompson's death wasn't just a murder. It was justice. But as Mangione's lawyer, Friedman Agnifilo, dug into the Manifesto, the story became even more complex. This isn't just a man who lost his mind, she said in a press conference. This is a man who is telling us what the hell is wrong with this country. They want you to believe he's a monster, but maybe he's not the monster. Maybe the real monsters are the ones in suits, raking in profits off of human lives. Public opinion was split. On one side, you had people who thought Mangione was a cold-blooded killer who deserved to be locked away forever. On the other, there was a growing army of supporters who saw him as a martyr, a symbol of the fight against a corrupt healthcare system. These were people who had been burned by medical bills, by insurance denials, by the system that seemed more concerned with profits than people. The more the Manifesto was revealed, the more people began to ask, was this a murder or a message? Was Mangione some kind of misguided hero, or just a man who couldn't cope with the system anymore? Was the murder of Brian Thompson just the start of a bigger revolt? I'm not a killer, Mangione said in a rare statement to the press from his holding cell. I did what I had to do. We've all been pushed too far. His words were like fuel to the fire, igniting more debate, more fury. People who felt like they'd been crushed by the weight of the American healthcare system found themselves rallying behind him. Meanwhile, the prosecutors were sharpening their knives. Mangione's Manifesto, while shocking, could also be the key to proving his cold-blooded intent. They weren't just charging him with murder, they were building a case for terrorism. They were going to make sure the whole world saw Mangione as the face of an attack on American institutions, on everything that made the country what it was. You can't just shoot a man because you don't like his job, said one of the lead prosecutors. This is about more than just revenge. This is about terrorism. A man who goes to those lengths isn't just mad. He's dangerous. The stage was set. As the case moved toward trial, Mangione became the center of a storm. The question remained. Was he a martyr for the cause? Or was he just another killer who had taken things too far? The truth was slipping further away with each passing day. And with every new detail about Mangione's Manifesto, the lines between justice and vengeance were becoming harder to draw. Would anyone ever know the real reason behind Thompson's murder? Or was this just the start of a much bigger, much darker story? Chapter 4. The Free Luigi Movement. Hero or killer? The chaos didn't stop with Mangione's arrest. In fact, it was just the beginning. What the media didn't expect was the sheer force of the movement that started to grow around him. As the case spread across the country, so did the controversy. A strange thing happened. People started rallying behind Luigi Mangione. They weren't just talking about him, they were supporting him. It started small. A few posts on social media, some messages of "Free Luigi," from frustrated individuals who felt powerless against the system. But it didn't take long for it to snowball. The more people learned about Mangione's manifesto, the more they seemed to understand his anger. Some even began to see him as a hero, a man who had taken a stand against the injustice they had all suffered at the hands of the health insurance industry. One of the first signs of this growing movement appeared when a billboard went up in Lower Manhattan. It was a massive ad, bigger than life, showing an image of Mangione's face with the words "Free Luigi" sprawled across it. Beneath it, the hashtag Justice for Luigi had started to trend. People who had been victimized by the healthcare system, or who had simply grown fed up with it, saw in Mangione someone who was speaking for them. The billboard wasn't just an ad, it was a rallying cry. First, it was just a few supporters. But as the case hit headlines again and again, donations to Mangione's legal defense fund started pouring in. A total of over $780,000 within just a few days. The money came from all corners of the country, frustrated people who had spent years fighting insurance companies, dealing with out-of-pocket costs, and dealing with the very system Mangione had lashed out at. One man who wished to remain anonymous said, "You've got to understand what Mangione did. It's like the last straw. We're all drowning and no one's helping us. So yeah, I donated. If he can take on the system, then maybe we've got a chance." But Mangione wasn't some Robin Hood figure, and his lawyers weren't letting anyone forget it. Friedman Agnifilo, his defense attorney, made it clear that this case wasn't just about one man's death. It was about a larger issue. She told reporters, "This isn't just a trial, it's a fight for justice." Luigi wasn't a killer. He was someone who couldn't stand to watch what this system was doing to people anymore. But for the families of Brian Thompson and others affected by Mangione's actions, this was nothing short of an insult. "How dare they call him a hero?" said Thompson's widow in an emotional interview. "My husband is dead. He's not coming back. And now they want to make this monster into some kind of martyr? I don't care about his manifesto or his so-called cause. He killed my husband." And yet, despite the backlash, the movement kept growing. Protesters outside courtrooms held up signs with Mangione's face on them, chanting "Free Luigi." Supporters were even posting messages on social media, comparing him to the likes of civil rights figures, claiming that Mangione had fought against an unjust system. The narrative had taken a dramatic turn. The question wasn't just whether Mangione would be convicted or not. It had become about what he represented. Was he a killer, a victim of the system, or something in between? As the courtroom drama continued, there was one undeniable fact. Mangione's case had become about so much more than just his crime. It had sparked a nationwide conversation about the healthcare system, and whether it was truly working for the people it was meant to serve, or whether it was broken beyond repair. One thing was clear. The more people rallied behind Mangione, the more the line between justice and rebellion became blurred. Would this case bring change, or was it just a dangerous precedent? Could a man be justified for murder if his reasons seemed right? The debate was heating up, and it wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. The question on everyone's mind was this: was Luigi Mangione a hero for the voiceless, or a cold-blooded killer who had gone too far? Either way, the battle for his fate was about to get even messier. Chapter 5. The Tug of War, State versus Federal, and the Battle for a Life. The courtrooms were packed. Cameras, reporters, and even protesters lined the halls. It wasn't just a murder trial anymore, it was a political circus. Luigi Mangione's case had morphed into a battle of ideologies, with his fate hanging in the balance. What started as a shooting outside a Manhattan hotel had turned into a clash between state and federal power, with each side fighting for control over how to handle his future. It wasn't just about whether Mangione should live or die. It was about who controlled his fate. The tension between state and federal prosecutors was palpable, and it seemed like everyone had an opinion. The death penalty, which U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi had pushed for, loomed over everything. But New York state prosecutors had their own plans. They didn't want to just throw Mangione in a federal prison to rot. They wanted him to pay for his crime right there, in New York. "This is a game for them," Friedman Agnifilo, Mangione's defense lawyer, said during one heated press conference. "They're playing politics with my client's life. It's a tug of war, and the prize is a young man's future." The stakes couldn't have been higher. New York's case focused on the murder, pure and simple. The facts were damning. Mangione had shot Brian Thompson in cold blood. But for the feds it wasn't just a murder, it was terrorism. They argued that Mangione's manifesto, his targeting of a CEO from one of America's largest healthcare companies, was part of a larger political agenda. The feds saw him as a threat to the very system that held America together. The tension between the two was like a slow-burning fuse. The state prosecutors wanted him to face the full consequences of his crime, but the feds wanted to make sure the death penalty was on the table. Bondi, ever the political player, was all in. "This is a message to anyone who thinks they can take the law into their own hands," she said, eyes sharp with resolve. "This is how we fight back." But Mangione's supporters saw things differently. They pointed to the rising number of donations in his defense fund and the protests outside the courthouse. "The system's broken," one of his supporters yelled during a rally. "Mangione's not the problem. The people who kill us with their bills and policies are the real criminals." Inside the courtroom, the drama was heating up. The defense was pushing hard against the federal charges, claiming that they were politically motivated. They pointed out that Mangione's manifesto was a result of frustration, not premeditation. Agnifilo argued that her client wasn't some mastermind. He was a man pushed to the edge by a broken system. A system that had crushed him and countless others. But prosecutors weren't backing down. They argued that Mangione's actions, his calculated murder of an innocent man, were part of a larger plan to dismantle the very system that held America together. "This isn't just about a murder," one prosecutor said. "It's about an attack on our way of life. And we cannot allow that to stand." As the courtroom drama unfolded, the question became, who would win the fight for Mangione's life? The state wanted him to pay for his crime in New York, but the feds had the death penalty in their sights. With each day, the pressure mounted, and it seemed that every move Mangione made would be scrutinized in front of the nation. The stakes were higher than anyone could have predicted. The trial was far from over, but one thing was clear: Mangione had become a symbol of something much bigger than himself. Would he face the death penalty for his actions, or would the political tug-of-war over his life leave him a pawn in a game he never asked to play? The world was watching, and the tension was only building. The next move was anyone's guess, but one thing was for sure. This case was going to explode before it was over. Chapter 6. The Ghost Gun That Changed Everything. When the news broke about the ghost gun, things took a turn that no one saw coming. Luigi Mangione wasn't just a man on trial for murder anymore. He had become the poster child for everything people feared about the future of firearms, justice, and the American system. The untraceable weapon he had in his possession, the ghost gun, was like a ticking time bomb in the media, sparking outrage and fear. How had Mangione, a seemingly regular guy, gotten his hands on such a dangerous tool? A ghost gun wasn't just any ordinary weapon. It was a firearm that could be assembled from parts and printed out with a 3D printer, bypassing all the laws that normally kept guns in check. There were no serial numbers, no background checks, just pure, untraceable firepower. And in Mangione's case, it was the weapon that allegedly killed Brian Thompson. It was the smoking gun, literally and figuratively, that turned everything upside down. Inside the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. The prosecution couldn't wait to bring up the ghost gun at every opportunity. It was their trump card. This wasn't just a crime of passion, one prosecutor stated, his voice tight with anger. This was premeditated murder, planned with tools that are illegal, dangerous, and impossible to trace. This is a man who went beyond what's acceptable. He didn't just kill someone. He weaponized his anger with the deadliest means possible. Mangione's defense team, led by the unrelenting Friedman Agnifilo, didn't flinch. They knew the ghost gun would be their toughest hurdle, but they also knew that the story didn't end there. Agnifilo argued that Mangione wasn't some master criminal. This gun wasn't the cause of the problem. It was a symptom of a much bigger issue. An issue that's been festering in this country for years. If we're going to focus on the weapon, we're missing the point, she shot back. He was pushed to this point by a system that failed him, and many others like him. But the media didn't care about Mangione's reasoning. All they cared about was the ghost gun. Headlines blazed across every outlet. Untraceable weapon used in shocking murder. Ghost gun. the weapon that could change the future of crime. The fear of ghost guns, combined with Mangione's radical manifesto, was a recipe for disaster. The public wanted answers, and they wanted them now. One of the most chilling revelations in the case was how easy it had been for Mangione to get his hands on the gun. It was like something straight out of a dystopian thriller. A 3D printer, a few pieces of metal, and a couple of clicks online, and voila, you have an untraceable weapon ready to kill. "That's what scares me the most," said one former law enforcement officer during an interview. "Anyone can do it." And Mangione proved just how easy it is to get a gun without any oversight. In the midst of all this, Mangione's defenders continued to argue that his crime was rooted in the frustration of a man who had been failed by the system. "We can talk all day about guns, about weapons, but we need to ask why a man like Luigi felt like this was his only option," Agnifilo told reporters, her voice thick with emotion. "The real danger isn't just the ghost gun. It's the system that drove him to it." Despite all the noise, Mangione's case was far from settled. With the ghost gun in the spotlight, everyone was asking the same question. Could a man really be justified for murder if he was pushed by a corrupt system? Or was Mangione just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode? As the trial continued, the question lingered in the air. Would Mangione's fate be sealed by his weapon? Or would his manifesto and the reasons behind his crime change the way America looked at justice? Chapter 7. Bondi's Death Penalty Gambit. A dangerous political move? The courtroom was on fire, figuratively of course, but the heat was real. Pam Bondi had thrown down the gauntlet, and the consequences were about to shake the nation to its core. The decision was made. The feds weren't just going to charge Luigi Mangione with murder. They were going for the death penalty. The stakes were higher than anyone could have predicted, and the case was no longer just about a man's crime. It was about sending a message. Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, had made it clear that the murder of Brian Thompson was no ordinary crime. This wasn't a case for some standard conviction. This was an act of cold, premeditated violence that could not go unpunished. "This is the time to make an example of him," Bondi declared in a press conference. Her words landed like a slap across the face of anyone who dared question the severity of the crime. The political implications were impossible to ignore. Some saw it as a necessary move, a way to show that the government was serious about cracking down on violent crime. Others, though, saw it as an incredibly dangerous political game. Bondi wasn't just carrying out justice. She was pushing a larger agenda. "This is about proving that we won't let anyone undermine our way of life," she said, her eyes burning with resolve. "We are carrying out President Trump's mission to make America safe again." But not everyone was buying it. Mangione's defense team, led by the tireless Friedman Agnifilo, couldn't help but point out the glaring politics behind Bondi's decision. "This isn't justice. This is a political maneuver." Agnifilo fired back, her voice dripping with disgust. "They're using my client as a pawn in a much bigger game, and they're willing to sacrifice his life to make a point." Her words resonated with many, but especially those who had been watching the case unfold. Mangione's supporters didn't see him as a killer. They saw him as a symbol of resistance against a broken system. "They're making him the villain, but they're the real monsters," one supporter shouted outside the courthouse, holding a sign that read "Free Luigi." But Bondi wasn't fazed. She stood firm in her stance, framing the death penalty as not just a necessary punishment for Mangione, but as a tool to ensure that violent criminals didn't get away with their actions. "If we let people like him get away with murder, what happens next? More violence. More bloodshed," Bondi argued. The message was clear. Let the punishment fit the crime, and send a powerful statement to anyone who thought they could take matters into their own hands. Despite the outcry from Mangione's defenders, the political atmosphere only grew more intense. The question on everyone's mind wasn't just whether Mangione deserved to die. It was whether Bondi's move was a calculated attempt to win political favor, or if she truly believed it was the only option. And if she was successful in pushing the death penalty, what did that mean for the future of justice in America? As the days dragged on, the media began to spin the story into something far more than just a courtroom drama. It was now a full-blown political crisis, and the ramifications stretched far beyond one man's fate. The death penalty debate was reignited, and opinions on Mangione's actions became polarized like never before. The public was torn. Some wanted Mangione to face the ultimate punishment, seeing it as a necessary action to preserve law and order. Others saw the push for the death penalty as part of a larger, more sinister political agenda designed to divide and conquer. Was Bondi trying to show she was tough on crime? Or was she simply using the Mangione case to score points with her political base? For Mangione's defenders, the fight wasn't just about winning in court. It was about stopping what they saw as a dangerous precedent. This isn't about justice anymore, Agnifilo said in one final fiery statement. This is about control. As the trial neared its climax, everyone knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The pressure was building, and whether Mangione would face the death penalty, or whether he would become the rallying cry for an even bigger political fight, remained to be seen. But one thing was crystal clear. This case had become a flashpoint for everything that was wrong with the American justice system. And no one could turn back now. Chapter 8. The final showdown. Will Luigi live or die? The clock was ticking. April 18, 2025, loomed on the horizon. The day that would decide Luigi Mangione's fate. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. It wasn't just another hearing. It was the last battle. The stakes had never been higher. Would Mangione face the death penalty for the murder of Brian Thompson? Or would he walk away? His life forever changed by the political chaos that had consumed the case? The media had been hyping the trial for months, spinning every new detail into a frenzy. Headlines screamed, "Will Mangione die for his crimes?" And the fate of a nation rests on Mangione's trial. The world had its eyes fixed on the courtroom, where the final decisions would be made. But the real question was, what did justice even look like in a case like this? Inside the courtroom, Mangione sat quietly. His defense team had fought tooth and nail to keep the death penalty off the table. But with Pam Bondi's push for execution, they were up against a wall. "This is bigger than one man," Agnifilo had said in the final days leading up to the hearing. "This isn't just about Luigi anymore. It's about whether the government has the right to take his life. It's about who we are as a country." Her words hit hard. Mangione wasn't just a killer to some. He was a symbol. His supporters believed he had taken a stand against the ruthless healthcare system that had torn apart too many lives, while his critics saw him as a dangerous vigilante who needed to be put down for good. As the trial reached its climax, the room was divided, and the nation was forced to pick sides. But the tension in the air wasn't just political. The families, the victims, the survivors, they were all there too. Thompson's widow, Marissa, sat in the front row, her face drawn with grief. She hadn't spoken publicly much during the trial, but today her voice was loud and clear. "This man took everything from me," she whispered to a reporter, tears welling up in her eyes. "He's not a hero. He's a murderer. And he deserves to pay for what he did." Her words hit the courtroom like a punch. The raw emotion, the pain of a woman who'd lost her husband, was impossible to ignore. But Mangione's supporters weren't backing down. They wore shirts that said, "Free Luigi," and held up signs that read, "Justice for the oppressed." They weren't just protesting the death penalty. They were protesting a system they saw as broken beyond repair. As the judge prepared to make his decision, the room fell silent. The legal battle had come down to one thing. What kind of message did the government want to send? Was this about protecting society from someone like Mangione? Or was it about using his death as a symbol for a political agenda? The prosecution argued that Mangione's crime was too heinous to be left unchecked. He planned this murder with a clear agenda. One prosecutor argued, voice steady but fierce. He wasn't just killing a man. He was sending a message to the entire healthcare system. This was terrorism, plain and simple. But Agnifilo wasn't having it. "This man did something horrible, yes?" she said, her voice ringing out. "But we cannot allow the state to take his life as part of some political game. If we do, we lose our humanity. We lose the ability to make real change." The judge's gavel slammed down, signaling the end of arguments. The jury would decide Mangione's fate. As they deliberated, the air seemed to grow thicker with every passing minute. In the hallway, people whispered anxiously, unsure of what was about to happen. Would the jury side with the prosecution, or would they see Mangione as a victim of a corrupt system? Finally, The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The jury returned to the courtroom. The room was silent as the foreperson stood and handed over the verdict. The tension was suffocating. Guilty of first-degree murder, the foreperson announced. A gasp swept through the room. But the next words were what everyone had been dreading. But the jury has recommended life imprisonment without parole, not the death penalty. There was a stunned silence. Mangione's supporters cheered, but there was no celebration. It wasn't the win they had wanted. It wasn't the victory they had hoped for. But it was a win nonetheless. Mangione would live. But what kind of life would it be? Locked away, a symbol of all that was wrong with the system, or a man who had simply done what he thought was right in a world that had failed him? In the end, it wasn't about the crime anymore. It was about the message, the fight for justice, the struggle for change, and the question that would haunt everyone involved. Who decides who lives and who dies? The verdict that shocked America. Life or death? The courtroom went silent as the verdict was read. Guilty of murder, but no death penalty. Luigi Mangione, the man who had terrorized the healthcare system with his manifesto and ghost gun, was sentenced to life behind bars. It wasn't the outcome anyone expected, and it left the nation divided. Was he a hero fighting a broken system, or a cold-blooded killer deserving of his fate? The question still lingers. As Mangione's supporters cheered and his critics mourned, one thing was certain. This wasn't the end. The battle over his actions, the system he fought, and the future of justice had only just begun. Want more stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat? Hit that subscribe button, like the video, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss the next shocking tale. You won't want to miss what's coming next.